Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Springfield Township Board of Trustees regular meeting. It is Tuesday, March 8th, 2022 at approximately 5:30 p.m. Mr. Burning, will you please have the roll call?
Yes, Mr. Burning?
Present.
Mr. Honolaw?
Present.
Ms. Davis?
Present.
All the trustees are present.
Thank you, and I ask that you all stand with me and we pledge allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First on our agenda for this evening is the public hearing regarding the 2022 permanent appropriations. Mr. Gilbert, do you have a presentation?
I do. Thank you, Ms. Davis.
Thank you.
It's that time of year again when we adopt our permanent appropriations. As the board is aware, in late December, early January, we adopt our temporary appropriations, which allows us to close out the previous year, determine carryover amounts and available fund balances for the next year, and then allows us to prepare the permanent appropriations that are required to be certified and sent to the county at the end of March. So this evening we are looking at, again, the 22 permanent appropriations, and there have been some changes since the temporary, and hopefully throughout this presentation, which albeit is brief, because with hundreds of different fund items and our fund numbers, as well as the various components to each department, it'd be impossible to go through in a public meeting over every line item. However, we'll try and hit the highlights. So I think it's always good just to start with how the budget process works in a township. So in July, and I know it sounds odd, but in July it really starts our process when we create the tax budget. And the tax budget essentially provides us with actual numbers from the previous year, actual revenue and expenditures from the previous year. Then it also provides us with first half actual revenues and expenditures from that current year and estimated for the second half of that year, and then it also forecasts what revenues and expenditures will be for the subsequent year. And as the board is aware, we're very conservative in terms of our revenues and also our sort of worst case scenario with our expenditures, so that we're never caught in a situation where we are caught off guard by not having enough revenue for our anticipated expenditures. So again, we create that tax budget in July. In September, the county certifies the township tax budget, which then creates sort of our certificate of resources, which shows how much money we will have available. The township authorizes the tax levies in October. Then in January, we adopt the temporary, and then here we are in March where we adopt the permanent, which is our essentially our budgetary guidebook for the year. And I think it's important to note that these are called appropriations for a reason. That we appropriate the money, but it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to spend it. But in a township, you legally have to have the money appropriated before you can legally expend any money. So we take from our cash balances, we appropriate some of that, which then allows us to expend the money if the board so chooses. And again, just because you appropriate money in this process, this board still has to approve any purchase over $2,500 from these appropriations. So I think some people think that just because we're going to spend or appropriate this money that it's as good as spent. And in fact, what I will illustrate is we spend less than 80% of what's appropriated each year. So in 21, the appropriations were just under $35 million. And also, I think it's important to realize that unlike some cities and in particular school districts, the township doesn't separate it out operational and capital operating budgets. So our capital costs are blended into our operating costs in these appropriations. And if we receive a grant, it shows up as an expenditure and not as an appropriation. So it takes quite a bit of digging to figure out exactly what is actual tax dollars in terms of local tax dollars and what may be federal funding or state funding from a grant perspective. So, and sometimes when the budget goes up, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It may just be because we received more in grant funding or federal funding that allows us to do some stuff. So just understand that when you look at these numbers. And then again in 22, we're looking at about a 10.4% increase. And again, as I just indicated, $8.1 million of the almost $38 million that's appropriated this year is either grants or federal funding. So over $3 million of that, 8.1, is directly from the federal government in the local fiscal recovery funds or the American Rescue Plan Act. So again, yes, budget went up 10%. That's because we received more outside money that we have to show as an appropriation. Looking at it by department, just under $3.8 million for general government, which includes community arts, code enforcement, events, communications, and debt service on some obligations that we have, general obligations. Fire EMS is just about a little under $9 million, and 200,000 of that is appropriated this year strictly for overtime. I think, Chief will attest that we're having a very difficult time recruiting and retaining part-time paramedic firefighters, which as a result, in order to fill those shifts to meet the service demand, we're having to impose mandatory overtime on our full-time staff, which in a normal year, we spend between $30,000 to $50,000 in overtime. In the last 2 years, we've seen that increase 4 to 5 times that amount, mainly because just the availability of our part-time staff isn't there. The idea that we're going to go out and have 50, 60 part-timers that are going to fill those shifts for us just isn't happening right now, because a lot of departments are hiring full-time, so they're being hired away from us. And at the same time, there's not as many people going through the academies that want to do that job. So we're in sort of a low point right now in terms of staffing availability for part-time fire paramedics, but again, paying the overtime is still cheaper than hiring full-time to fill those shifts. So we're continuing to do that and look for innovative ways to recruit part-timers, but it is definitely a struggle at this point in time. Looking at police, just a little over $10 million. One of the major expenditures outside of normal operating costs and salaries is we are replacing 5 police cruisers this year, one of which I'm happy to report that we're going to attempt to see how a hybrid vehicle will work. And I think obviously all of us can attest that gas prices right now are a little out of control. So we're going to see how a hybrid vehicle will work as a police cruiser. They obviously, they spend 100 to 150 miles a shift out on the road. So we're hoping that it will work, but we want to buy one this time just to test it out. And if it does, and we have good results with it, we'll continue to backfill the fleet with non-gasoline powered vehicles and see how it works out. But in the infrastructure department, in terms of public works, which is just a little under $7 million, $3.2 million of that is in infrastructure from township funding. But what you'll see is we're spending over $6 million this year in infrastructure improvements. Just about half of that is coming from township funding, because the other half is part of those grants that I talked about just a second ago. So that is good news, and this is the most we've ever spent in any one year on infrastructure, which for those of us that don't speak public works, that's roads. So roads, sewers, sidewalks, things of that nature, mostly road restoration and pavement preservation projects. So we are definitely making headway as it relates to infrastructure, and we'll talk about that here just a little later in the presentation, exactly what that looks like. As we look at appropriations by department in comparison to last year, you can see they're up a little bit in each department, and that's simply because, again, some of the departments, especially police and fire, are very personnel heavy, and I think that's just the nature of those services. So they're 24/7 operations, which take a lot of personnel to operate those departments. So over 80% of their budget strictly comes down to personnel. And as a result, those salary and benefit packages increase every year, just in every sector. And in addition to that, the cost of things are just going up, whether it's purchasing and replacing equipment, obviously fuel, things of that nature. So they are going up in each department. When you look at Public Works especially, it's going up because we generally spend what's available. So we don't hold back money in Public Works because the need is there to fix as many roads as we possibly can. So we generally spend as much as we can out of the Public Works funds. So if the money's there and the revenue is available, we're going to take advantage of that and spend it where it needs to go, which is on the roads. Again, just as a reminder, so a lot of these budgets go up from year to year because of outside funding. So as I mentioned, we generally spend less than 80% of what we appropriate each year, and in this case, last year in 21, we spent 77% of what we appropriated. I think the year previous was 78%. So while we are budgeting or appropriating almost $38 million this year, we generally will spend somewhere between 75 to 78% of that. And we appropriate it just in the event that we need to spend it. It's there, but we hope in a lot of these categories where we have appropriations that we never have to spend them. But we do appropriate it just in case, those situations necessitate that particular expenditure. Looking at revenue, and the general fund sort of fluctuate each year, and that's primarily based on the Joint Economic Development Zone. So the majority of our departments, their revenue stays flat because they're property tax dependent. With the general fund, it's a little more volatile in terms of the Joint Economic Development Zone and the income tax. So you see the up and downs there in the first column. Public Works Department, a mild increase each year. That's primarily because of the motor vehicle license tax and the gas tax had brought in some additional revenue in the past few years. When you look at police and fire and you see the big jump from the previous 2 years to the last two, that's the 2.5 mil levies that were approved back in November of 20. So you see that bump there in those two departments. Then if you look in the ambulance EMS fund, it's generally around $900,000 to $1 million a year is what the medical billing brings in the ambulance EMS fund. This is back to 2016, what the township has spent in infrastructure spending. So again, this year we're spending a little over $6.5 million in infrastructure, which Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's close to 30 streets this year?
That is correct.
Yeah. So the biggest expenditure we've made, $3.265 million of that is coming from the township, so the rest of that is grant funding that we received. And since 2015, over $22 million in infrastructure and $8.7 million in outside grants were brought into the township. So there's probably not a lot of other communities with our size and our resources that can say in the last, 7 years that they spent $22 million on infrastructure. So, and again, over $8 million of that was money that didn't come from local taxpayers. I think that's huge. So, and obviously that's a credit to Mike Gould and his department and everything that he does to bring those outside dollars. So I think while we still have a lot of work to do, we have 400 streets in the township and a lot of them I know still need repair. I think the fact that we can say that we've repaved close to 30 to 35% of the roads in the last 6 years is pretty remarkable. So we'll continue with that. I will show you though later on in the projections that we can't afford to spend $3 million every year on infrastructure. I know it's hard to turn down the grant funding because it's 2 for $1. They're covering 50% of the cost, but at some point we're going to have to slow down on that spending because right now we're drawing down on those reserves and we're spending more than we're bringing in as it relates to infrastructure because we're drawing down on that carryover amount. And while that's good and we're getting those outside dollars, at some point we're going to have to either figure out a way to raise additional revenue for infrastructure or we're going to have to slow down on our progress. And I hate to say that, but that's just the nature of the numbers. And we'll continue to look for those outside funding sources. But I think for the next few years, we may start looking at pavement preservation projects as opposed to complete rehabilitations of roads, and then maybe in a few years pick that back up again as we can build that reserve back up. Speaking of those fund projections, as you can see here, the line in green is available revenue. The line in purple is projected expenditures. So that isn't necessarily yearly revenue that you see in green. It's just available revenue. So you see that sharp decline. That's because you're starting to draw down on your carryover or your savings, if you will. Expenditures continue to go up every year because, again, we're trying to expend the money to match those grants that we receive, where we have to put forth 50% of the matching amount. So when those lines converge, that's not a good thing. You want to keep those lines as far apart as possible. So at some point, we're going to have to flatten out that green line and reduce that purple line. We can't have those lines intersect. So it's just a good illustration to show you kind of where we are and where we're heading. Again, in police, with the passage of the 2.5 mills back in November of 20, they're looking pretty good for the next 4 or 5 years. And as I said, and remember, these expenditures are showing a worst case scenario, and the available revenue numbers are showing a very conservative number. So my expectation is that we do a little better each year in terms of available revenue because we're not spending as much as we appropriate, and we do a little better because we're not expending. We're bringing in more money because we're just very conservative in those numbers, but at the same time, police and fire are a little more predictable because of the property tax aspect. But again, I think that blue line will continue to flatten out because we're going to spend less than what we're projecting out to 25 and 26. So hopefully we can get as many years as we did in the previous levy out of police and fire, which was 10, 11 years. But with the cost of just operating costs nowadays, I'm not confident that that's going to happen, but we're going to do everything within our power to do so. When you look at fire, the situation is a little more dire. And again, that's mainly because of just the staffing issues that we're experiencing in fire. And then at the same time, you know, they're drawing down on their reserves as well in order to meet that demand. So what this really illustrates here in the fire department, as the board is well aware, is back in 2011, outside of the 2.5 mills that was passed back in November of 20, in 2011, the community passed a 1 mill levy, which generated $500,000 a year. It was renewed again in 2016 because it's a 5-year levy that sunsets again every 5 years. So that ends at the end of this year, which means that if it isn't renewed at the end of this year, the fire department's going to lose $500,000 a year in revenue starting next year, which is why you see that drop in that green line, that sharp drop. I can't underestimate or overestimate or emphasize how important that $500,000 is going to be in order to keep the fire department solvent. So while at the time I wish it wasn't a levy that had to be renewed every 5 years, I think it could potentially be a good thing because the public can see that we are using it and we are maintaining the service that we promised that we would. But at the same time, that was $500,000 that it generated back in 2011, and it still generates $500,000 today, which means that that revenue isn't keeping pace with inflationary costs of operating that department. And again, I think if the levy is placed again on the ballot this November to renew that 1 mill, which undoubtedly I think we have to do just based on what the financial situation looks like, I think it's important to note to the residents that it doesn't increase taxes. It keeps them exactly where they are today. It just maintains that revenue that the fire department has been receiving since 2011. I think arguably you could say that the department needs more than that. But at this time, I think it's probably wise that we look just to renew it at the end of this year and see how far we can stretch both the levy that was passed in November 20 as well as this levy that should be renewed or hopefully will be renewed at the end of this year. So again, when you look at future budgetary considerations, things that stick out are obviously the sustainability of the fire department funds and the service levels that we're providing. We run 4 paramedic squads 24/7. And I think at some point we're going to have a serious conversation with the public and say, is that the level of service that we have to provide? And if so, we're going to have to be very honest with what that service costs. And it's not cheap. And additionally, with the idea that we can't fund our part-time, I'm not fund them, but we can't staff our part-time hours, that's making the situation even more difficult because every time we have to hire a full-time person, that's costing us about 30 to 40% more than it would to be able to fill those hours with a part-timer. So the idea that we're going to just go out and hire full-time people to fund that, would add another $1.5 million of cost to a department that's already struggling to meet the funding demands that are placed upon it today. Again, as I talked about, the infrastructure spending and the impacts of the general fund. So again, this is going to be dictated by JED's revenue. So if the JED's revenue continues, or if it goes up, which hopefully it will with some of the economic development projects that we're seeing happening in the community, we may be able to continue with this pace, albeit maybe a little slower pace, but definitely not $3 million a year. But we can absorb, $1 million to $1.5 million a year in expenditures, hopefully matching those with some outside funding. So maybe do $3 to $3.5 million a year in infrastructure improvements. But we'll have to see how the JED's revenue is coming in. And then lastly, and as we've talked about, it's just expenditures versus revenue. It's a simple equation. And we have to make sure that we get that revenue number close to that expenditure number. There's only really two options. It's not rocket science. You either have to increase revenue or you have to decrease expenditures. So right now we're okay. The projections are looking pretty good. Again, assuming that the fire department can pass and renew that $1 million levy this November. But at the same time, there are some decisions that need to be made in the next few years, and that's a serious conversation with the community to say, what is the service level do you want, and how much of that are you willing to pay for? We're not, as a local government, not immune to the inflationary, cost increases that everyone sees in their daily lives. And when you run a department of, 50 police officers and, 35 full-time paramedic firefighters, and then another, 20 to 30, hopefully sometimes 40 to fill the shifts part-timers, it's a big expense. And, when you run a department 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, the costs are pretty exorbitant. But at the same time, that's what the community has to decide. What level of service do you want? And the cost will come accordingly. So I know that was sort of big picture, and the board obviously has copies of the appropriation. So at this time, I guess I'll entertain any questions of the board or the public.
Well, I just want to make a couple comments. One is everyone's having the same problem with part-time firefighters. There just aren't enough of them. So if guys want to work full-time, there's full-time opportunities everywhere. You're reading the paper every couple of weeks. I know Fairfield, it was just in the paper, is adding a bunch of full-time firefighters, so they're going to pass a big levy to cover it because the part-timers just aren't out there anymore because there's just not enough firefighters, period. So that diminishes that. The second thing is, a 10% increase sounds like, 10.4% increase sounds like a lot, but of the $3 million of the increase in appropriations, $2.6 million of it is for road projects. And if you look at last year I believe was the biggest road project expense we ever had by about $1 million. So this year we're going $2.6 million above that. Yeah. So clearly most of the increase is in trying to get our road situation as close to, back to 100%. I know about 7 years ago we had about a $42 million road problem, and that's why we spent $22 million in the last 7 years. So clearly, 10.4 sounds like a lot, but when you take out the additional road money, it's not, it's maybe 1 or 2%. So
sure.
That's all I had.
Chris, I just want to say thank you. You did a great job putting together all the data for us so we could see all the line item expenditures and the way you've organized everything. It makes it easy for us to review and understand the budget.
Well, I appreciate that, but then I have to pass that on to staff. They do a lion's share of the work in getting the numbers to me, and a lot of the spreadsheets that you see in here were generated by Mike and Rick and Rob and Kim Cox, obviously. So I appreciate that, and it is undoubtedly a big task, and it takes us months to put this information together, but really the credit goes to staff. They really make the budgetary process easier on me than maybe some township administrators have it, but they do a phenomenal job, and we work well together to put this together, so I do appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
If there's any questions of the public at all.
Are there any questions from members of the public about the public hearing? No questions? Okay. All right. So next on the agenda for tonight is a special presentation of the Star Award from Arts Connect. I'd like to invite up Lisa Zupan and Braden Williams to the front of the room. I believe Kim has a description of the award and the recipient for this year, so we will all come down.
This is a surprise to Brayden. Brayden does not know this. He does not know about this. Mom wanted to keep it a surprise.
So every year, Arts Connect awards a Star Award to a very deserving child who embodies the spirit of creativity, respect, communication, kindness, teamwork, and sharing with others who may be different than themselves. Through a generous donation of a private donor, the child of the Star Award receives a full scholarship to the Arts Connect Summer Camp for the following year. Tonight, we are awarding the 2022 Star Scholarship to Braden Williams. Braden attended multiple summer camps last year, and he exhibited respect, compassion, and kindness to his fellow students and camp staff. Braden was often seen helping students with their projects, and he made sure that everyone was included, and he would socialize with anyone who was alone during the break time. Braden's creativity was shown in everything he did. He was enthusiastic about all projects, but especially when he invented a unique toy car made of recycled materials. He was so excited about his creation and then touched us all by insisting that we donate it to children in Africa that he had learned about in camp. This showed real compassion to give up something he loved and was so proud of. Braden embodies the qualities of what a star student should be. Tonight we congratulate Braden Williams.
You're coming back this summer. Brayden has picked six out of the 8 camps to attend, so we're so excited to have him there.
I'm going to take a picture. Is that good? All right. 1, 2, 3.
Are you excited, Brandon?
Are you surprised? Yes. Mom said, oh, I'm not going to tell him anything about this.
He wondered why you brought him to this.
Yeah, he's like, why am I listening to all these numbers? Good job.
Hey, Kim, are one of the camps budget camp that he has to go to?
Budget camp, he's passed already. I almost said that the Star Award for a very deserving child who sat through budget, but.
Right. I just want to say how touched I was. I explained to him about when I volunteered in East Africa, these poor kids, they would make toys out of recycled materials, and he was just enthralled. So he put together the most creative toy, and then insisted that we knew he loved it. He insisted that, no, I want you to send it to them in Africa. So, very, very.
Mom, you should be very proud of your son. Yeah.
I want you all to know because something good for kids to see other, let people hear beside your parents to say something that you do really make a difference in what you do. So he definitely has a really kind heart, so it's very just right up and down. I appreciate it so much.
Wonderful. Congratulations again, Braden.
Congratulations.
All right, thank you. Okay. Next on our agenda, we have approval of minutes. We have minutes for approval from the regular meeting on February 8th, 2022, the regular work session on February 17th, 2022, and 2 special meetings. The first special meeting was held on January 19th, 2022 regarding Zoning Commission Case ZC 2021-005 in reference 8444 Winton Road, and the second special meeting was in regards to a bid opening that was held on February 22nd, 2022 for the 2022 Road Improvement Program. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Mr. Burning, may we please have the financial report?
Yes, Ms. Davis. For the month ending February 28th, 2022, the township expenditures were $1,707,883.64, and the receipts were $949,156.52. That gives us a ending cash balance of $22,672,263.08, including obligations to expenditures, payroll, regular operating costs, ongoing capital improvement projects, and investment. And what I request is a motion to approve the receipts, warrants, payroll expenditures, update and current revenue reports for the period ending February 28th, 2022.
So moved.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. And I just want everyone to know that our financial reports are available for viewing here at the Township during regular business hours or on our website 24/7. Thank you, Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Burning. Mr. Gilbert, would you please give us your report on departmental action and discussion items?
I will. Thank you, Ms. Davis. I have 2 action items this evening. Both are additions to the approved caterer list for the Grove Banquet Hall. The first would be to One More Bite LLC at 1719 Elm Street, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45202. And I'm requesting a motion to approve this particular caterer to the approved catering list pending execution of required insurance agreement.
So moved.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
The second addition that we have is for David's Catering. Is that how we pronounce this? There's 3 E's in the name. 7896 Camargo Road. And this particular approval also will be pending revision of an insurance certificate.
So moved.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And personnel update this month. As we talked about during the budget session, I think this will give you an idea of the issues that we're experiencing in the fire department. We have the resignation of Jeff Morse, part-time paramedic firefighter, the resignation of Derek Greenlee, part-time paramedic firefighter, the resignation of Bradley Eberhardt, part-time EMT firefighter, and the resignation of Elena Cosolina, part-time medic only, and then the resignation of Madeline Sequina, full-time paramedic firefighter. She will come back as part-time, but could no longer maintain hours as a full-timer. You can see there, all of these individuals have left because they received full-time offers elsewhere. So it's getting harder and harder for us not only to recruit part-time staff, but to keep them here because they're being hired away in full-time jobs. Congratulations to them, but it's leaving pretty big holes in our staffing in the fire department as a result. But we did have the new hire of Sam Kemper, a full-time paramedic firefighter. He was one of our 1820, so we did gain probably about 300 hours, but at the same time, we're slowly, trying to bring people on. And Sam took the place of Madeline, who stepped down as part-time, so he moved up to that full-time slot. In the police department, we had the new hire of Nathan Fornash, and we had the new hire of Patrick Meyer to fill vacancies in our road patrol within the police department. In the public works department, we did have the promotions of Justin Anderson to senior laborer and the promotion of Kevin Jump to senior laborer as well. That concludes the staff report for personnel, and I'll turn it over to Kim for community events and programs.
Thank you. Next Saturday, March 19th, is our annual Mom Prom event. And then we have a dinner theater program called Rock Tales on April the 9th. And And then on May 21st, we have an artisan fair with 48 outdoor exhibitors.
Arson fair?
It's an artisan fair, yeah.
Artisan.
Artisan.
Arson,
That'll be
like.
back here.
Yeah.
Artisan, yes,
Okay.
Back
on the
in
field right here.
field.
Okay. Arson, got it. Okay. That concludes your,
I'm sorry, so that does include my staff report unless there are any questions to the board. Sorry.
thank you. Okay, we have 4 resolutions before the board tonight for consideration. The first resolution for consideration is resolution number 20-2022, modifying the schedule listing each street on which parking is prohibited or restricted within Springfield Township as required by section 302.2 of the Springfield Township parking regulations. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Seconded.
Mr. Burning.
Aye.
Mr. Honalaw.
Aye.
Ms. Davis.
Aye.
Resolution carries.
Next, we have resolution number 21-2022, authorizing private sale of unneeded and unfit for use property in the police department. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Seconded.
Mr. Burning.
Aye.
Mr. Honalaw.
Aye.
Ms. Davis.
Aye.
Resolution carries.
Next, we have resolution number 22-2022, approving cash advance from general fund to FEMA fund and community development block grant fund. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Seconded.
Mr. Burning.
Aye.
Mr. Honalaw.
Aye.
Ms. Davis.
Aye.
Resolution carries.
Next, we have resolution number 23-2022, declaring nuisances pursuant to Ohio Revised Code Section 505.87 at various listed properties within Springfield Township and authorizing statutory actions necessary to abate the nuisances. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Seconded.
Mr. Burning.
Aye.
Mr. Honalaw.
Aye.
Ms. Davis.
Aye.
Resolution carries.
Now we are at the section, do we have any old business?
I do not.
I do not.
Is there any new business?
I do not.
Not tonight, no.
I have some new business. I just want to recognize and honor, today is International Women's Day. And although, I love my male colleagues on the board, and I appreciate all the hard work of our male staff, I want to recognize and acknowledge all of the hard work of our female employees here with the township. You all do a tremendous job every day, and so today I honor you in observance of International Women's Day. Thank you. We've now come to the part of our agenda for citizens' participation. Is there anyone in attendance in the audience that would like to address the board? If so, I would ask you to please come forward to the podium, state your name and address for the record. No.
Everyone's looking at you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. So is there any other business before the board this evening? If there's no other business, I would like to have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned.
Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you all for coming.